I felt terror for the first time in 300 lifetimes, not facing an enemy, but fighting shoulder to shoulder with an ally. The moment is etched in my memory with perfect clarity. Music. I was crouched behind the shattered remains of a Ravager barricade. Music. My armor marked with plasma burns and my breath ragged inside my helmet. To my left, a human soldier named Rodriguez. Music. Reloaded his weapon with movements so practiced they seemed automatic. To my right, Admiral. Music. Chen stood exposed to the elements, completely vulnerable to enemy fire, calmly directing an orbital strike against a position less than 50 meters away. It was then that I understood what humanity truly was. It was then that I learned, music, what it meant to fear the species fighting alongside you, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's start at the beginning, when I first met the creatures that would teach me the meaning of fear. My name is Kitbar, fleet commander of the Altari Empire. I had lived through 300 cycles, fought in dozens of conflicts across the galaxy, and commanded fleets of thousands of ships. In all that time, music, in battles against the crystalline hive Balradi and the hive-mind Saphirians, I had never known true fear. Fear was an emotion unworthy, music, of an Altari warrior. Fear was weakness. The human delegation stood before the High Council like creatures dredged from a fever dream. They were small. They barely reached my shoulder. Their skin looked pale and soft, without natural armor, without claws, without any visible weapons integrated into their biology. When they spoke, their voices had strange inflections that the translation matrix struggled to interpret, music, correctly. "We are grateful for the opportunity to join the coalition," said the one who called himself Admiral Chen. "The Ravagers, music, have taken 3 of our outer colonies. We are prepared to commit our entire fleet to this alliance." My jaw clicked with amusement. Music, their entire fleet. Intelligence reports suggested that humanity possessed, music, at most, 200 ships, primitive artifacts powered by, music, crude fusion reactors. The Altari had overlooked more ships than that due to simple accounting errors. "We take note of your enthusiasm," boomed High Commander Bextel, whose massive frame dwarfed even my considerable size. "However, we must be realistic, music, about expectations. Perhaps your forces can serve in support roles. Music, supply lines, reconnaissance." The human admiral's face underwent a curious transformation. His lips drew back, revealing small, music, white teeth. My translator indicated that this was called a smile, supposedly a sign of pleasure. And yet, there was something about that expression that made my tail bristle. With an uneasy disquiet. "With all due respect, High Commander," Chen said, his voice sharpening in a way that hadn't been there before. "We didn't come here to load your ammunition. We came here to fight." The chamber fell silent. No species had ever spoken to Bextel like that. I expected immediate execution, music, or at least imprisonment. Instead, Bextel's own jaw clicked in what passed for altar laughter. "Music, fascinating," he said, "very well, humans. You will have your chance to prove yourselves. Fleet Commander Kitbar will oversee your integration into our battle groups." "Music," I nodded in agreement. Though inwardly I regarded this assignment as a form of punishment, babysitting primitives, music, who didn't understand their place in the galactic order, it wasn't how I had envisioned spending my next operational cycle. Music, later, in my private quarters, I reviewed the human files. Their technology was indeed primitive by coalition standards, but their ship designs were curious. Heavy armor, redundant systems, weapons that seemed designed for close-quarters combat rather than the precise, long-range fighting preferred by civilized species. "Computer, analyze human military doctrine," I ordered. "Insufficient data for a full analysis," it replied. "Human conflicts appear to favor what are termed combined arms and total war concepts. Warning. Several historical references exceed acceptable casualty parameters for simulation." It frowned. Its jaw clenched with interest. "Explain." Historical human conflicts show a willingness to accept casualty rates of 90% or more to achieve objectives. This seems to be considered normal, not exceptional. My breathing slowed. A 90% casualty rate was what we Altari considered the absolute worst-case scenario. The kind of losses, music, that ended wars and toppled governments, but humans considered it normal. Show me the specifications of their weapons. What appeared, music, on my screen defied logic. Nuclear weapons, crude fusion bombs that poisoned entire regions for generations, chemical weapons, music, that dissolved organic matter, biological weapons that turned immune systems against themselves. Even stranger were the music, delivery methods, projectiles that accelerated metal bullets through kinetic force, explosives designed to fragment into thousands of deadly pieces. These weapons are designed to maximize suffering, music, I muttered negatively. Analysis indicates that these weapons are designed, music, to maximize lethality regardless of collateral damage. Human military philosophy seems to prioritize the complete, music, destruction of enemy capability over tactical precision. I closed the files and, music, gazed at the stars. The next day I was to meet with human military advisors to plan their first joint operation against a Ravager outpost. The target, music, was a minor installation on the edge, perfect for testing the capabilities of our new allies, music, without risking larger assets. The outpost was defended by about 50 Ravager ships, music, and a few thousand ground troops. Standard coalition doctrine called for a siege, methodical bombardment to weaken defenses, music, and then a carefully orchestrated assault to minimize our own casualties. When Admiral Chen arrived at the briefing, he carried with him a scent that my enhanced senses, music, identified as some kind of stimulant. The human's eyes were brighter than before. Music, his movements were sharper. We've reviewed your battle plan, he said without preamble. It's very thorough. The coalition has perfected these tactics over millennia, I replied. Minimal losses, maximum efficiency. How long does your plan take to execute? Approximately, music, 47 standard hours from first contact to total victory. Music, his smile widened again. This time we can do it in 6. My translator must have been malfunctioning. Repeat that. 6, music, hours. Maybe 8. If they're especially well entrenched. Fleet commander training kicked in. Impossible claims usually indicate insanity, music, or elaborate deception. Explain your methodology. We hit them hard and fast. Overwhelming force applied directly, music, to the critical points. No siege, no wearing them down. We break their will to fight before they can mount a proper defense. Casualty projections for such an approach would be acceptable, Chen interrupted that word again. I was beginning to suspect that humans had a very different, music, definition of the term than the rest of the galaxy. Very well, I said finally. Show me. The music planning session that followed was unlike anything I'd experienced in 300 duty cycles. The humans approached the war with a creativity, music, that bordered on madness. They proposed using their own ships as battering rams. They suggested deliberately provoking the enemy into overextending their defenses. They calculated acceptable losses. With the same nonchalant precision with which other species, music, calculated fuel consumption. Are you planning to sacrifice these ships? I asked, gesturing to a group designated, music, for what they called a frontal assault. Not sacrifice, corrected Major Cruz, Chen's second-in-command. Compromise, there's a difference. We expect 70% of those ships to survive and, music, 30% not. Cruz held my gaze without blinking. They will have accomplished their mission. That's all that matters. Music, I found myself studying the humans around the table. There was Chen, serene and controlled, music, treating the potential deaths of thousands as acceptable variables, Cruz, cold and calculating, viewing ships and lives as resources to be spent. And a woman identified as Captain Rivera, Music, who was analyzing the devastating defensive positions with the detachment of someone solving an abstract puzzle. I need to understand something, I said, leaning forward. Your species is new to the galactic community. You've barely begun to establish yourselves among the stars. Why are you so, Music, willing to throw away lives and resources in a conflict that frankly doesn't directly threaten your homeworld? The humans looked at each other. It was Chen who answered, Music, Fleet Commander, how many species has the Coalition lost to the Ravagers? 17, confirmed. Maybe. Another dozen unconfirmed. And how many of those species effectively defended themselves? Music, I considered the question. None. The Ravagers are unlike any enemy we've ever faced. They don't negotiate, they don't retreat, and they consume everything, Music, they find. Most species surrender or flee when they realize that resisting is futile. That's the difference, Chen said quietly. Humans don't accept futility. We've faced extinction events on our own world more times than I can count, ice ages, supervolcano eruptions, asteroid impacts, plagues, and that was before we developed weapons capable of destroying ourselves. We're here because our ancestors refused to accept the inevitable. They fought, they adapted, they survived. But this isn't their war, I insisted. It became our war the moment the Ravagers attacked our colonies, Rivera chimed in. And besides, if we don't stop them here, they'll keep expanding. Eventually, they'll threaten Earth. Better to fight now on our terms than wait for them to choose the time and place. And besides, Cruz added with a grim smile, we're pretty good at fighting. It's kind of in our blood. The following days were spent preparing for the operation. I watched as human crews trained relentlessly, practicing maneuvers that coalition forces would consider suicidal. They ran simulations where the conditions for victory included 70, 80, and even 90% casualties. They seemed proud of finding solutions to scenarios that other species would classify as impossible to win. I spent time with individual human officers trying to understand what drove them. Captain Rivera invited me to observe her crew's combat training, and what I saw disturbed me on a fundamental level. The humans fought with a ferocity that seemed instinctive. They didn't just practice marksmanship and tactics, they practiced something they called close-quarters combat, where they physically grappled with each other, using leverage and technique to incapacitate the opponent. I saw a human half my size throw a male nearly twice her mass to the ground, using only correct positioning and inertia. Why? I asked Rivera. In modern warfare. Why maintain these primitive skills? Because sometimes you run out of ammunition, he replied simply. Sometimes weapons fail. Sometimes you end up face to face with the enemy and all you have are your hands and your will to survive. We train for every scenario, Commander, for each and every one. But the odds of needing those skills are low, he conceded. But they're not zero. And in combat, that they're not zero is enough. That night I found myself in what humans called a mess hall sharing a meal with several human soldiers. The food was strange, highly spiced in ways that tickled my tongue, but not unpleasant. Tell me about Earth, I said to a young soldier named Martinez. What's your homeworld like? Martinez's eyes took on a distant gleam. Beautiful, he said, dangerous, but beautiful. We have oceans that cover most of the planet, mountains that reach into the clouds, deserts, jungles, frozen wastelands, any environment you can imagine. And life has found a way to thrive in all of them, including humans, especially humans, she laughed. We're adaptable, it's in our blood. Put us anywhere and we'll figure out how to survive. Sometimes we even figure out how to thrive. Your species seems obsessed with survival. I observed that because we've been on the brink of extinction too many times, another soldier said. A woman named Jackson knows what a genetic bottleneck is, Commander, I shook my head. About 70,000 years ago. Something happened on Earth, we're not sure, maybe a supervolcano, a climate catastrophe, whatever it was, almost wiped us out. Genetic evidence suggests the entire human population dropped to maybe 10,000 individuals. Music, 10,000 worldwide. That's less than the complement of a single coalition super battleship. I said, stunned. Music, exactly. We came to the brink of extinction and somehow crawled back. I think that event is encoded, music, in our genetic memory. We remember on some deep level, music, what it means to face the end of everything. And we remember that we survived anyway. That's why you fight so fiercely. That genetic memory, Martinez leaned forward. Music, we fight fiercely because we know what happens if we don't. Earth's history isn't like yours, Commander. We didn't evolve on a world where music, cooperation was the dominant survival strategy. We evolved on a planet, music, where everything wanted to kill us. The weather, the animals, the diseases, even other humans. For most of our history, music, war was the norm, peace the exception. Their world sounds like hell, I said quietly. It was, Jackson agreed. That's why we're so good at making it hell for our enemies. We learn from the best teacher there is, survival. The conversation drifted to lighter topics, but I kept thinking about what, music, they had said. These humans were shaped by their environment in ways I'd never considered. They weren't just soldiers obeying orders. They were the product of, music, millions of years of evolution in a world that had repeatedly tried to kill them. Music, in the days that followed, I made it my mission to understand these creatures better. I attended their briefings, music, observed their training, and most importantly, listened to their stories. I spent an afternoon with Dr. Music, Sarah Bennett, the human chief medical officer. Her infirmary was unlike anything I'd ever seen. Music, where the coalition's medical facilities were sterile and efficient, the human one seemed almost alive. There were personal touches, music, everywhere. Photos of crew members' families, hand-drawn, music, children's pictures, even plants growing in small containers. Why all this? I asked, gesturing to the decorations. Because healing isn't just physical, Dr. Benet replied. When our people are injured, music, they need to be reminded of why they're fighting. These reminders help. Your approach seems inefficient. She smiled. A gentle expression that reminded me of how young humans could appear despite their capabilities. Perhaps. But our, music, survival rates are higher than the coalition's. Sometimes inefficient is, music, effective. Tell me something, Doctor. How do you reconcile your role as a healer with serving in a military context? Her smile faded. It's a question I ask myself every day, music, Commander. I became a doctor to save lives. But I also understand that sometimes to save the many, you have to allow those who take lives to take them from the few. It's not comfortable, but it's necessary. It sounds, music, conflicted. I am, he admitted. I think every human in this fleet, music, is conflicted. We are not mindless warriors. We know the weight, music, of what we do. We carry it every day, but we also know that if we don't, someone else will suffer. So we take on the burden. I met with Captain James Morrison, the human tactical officer, music, who had been key in planning the assault on the outpost. He invited me into his quarters, where he had set up what he called a war room, with the walls, music, covered in tactical screens and analyses of historical battles. This is the Battle of Thermopylae, he said, pointing to a screen. 300 Spartans held off an army of tens of thousands. For 3 days they knew they were going to die, but they bought time for their people to prepare. They lost, I observed, they lost the battle, Morrison corrected. But they won something more important. They proved that a small, well-motivated, well-positioned force could hold its own against a much larger enemy. They changed the course of history. This is the Battle of Stalingrad. 2 armies fighting among the ruins of a city during one of the worst winters on record. Millions died. The city was completely destroyed, and in the end, the defenders won because they refused to surrender. More death, more destruction, I said. Is this what humans aspire to? No, Morrison replied firmly. This is what humans learn from. Every battle, every war, every tragedy teaches us something. We study our failures as much as our victories because both have lessons. The question is not whether we will face impossible situations. The question is whether we'll be ready, music, when the time comes. And he thinks they're ready now. He was silent for a good while. I think we'll do what needs to be done. Whether that's the same as being ready, I don't know, but we'll know, music, soon enough. I also spent time with Lieutenant Commander Alex Chen, the Admiral's daughter and the ship's chief engineer. Music, her engine room was controlled chaos, with crew members moving between systems with practiced efficiency. My father says he's trying, music, to understand us, she said bluntly as she showed me around. Good luck with that. We barely understand ourselves. Music, you're his daughter. Guilty. I know what you're thinking. Nepotism, but I earned, music, this position. In fact, he's harder on me than anyone else, because he knows people will assume I didn't deserve it. I wasn't thinking that. I said, music, honestly. I was thinking about how difficult it must be to serve under her father in a combat situation. Her expression softened a little. Music, it is. Every time we go into battle, I have to put aside the fact that he's my father and remember that he's my, music, commander, and he has to do the same. We both know that I might have to make decisions that put me in danger, music, and that I might have to carry out orders that put him at risk. It's the price of serving together. So why, music, do it? Why not serve on separate ships? Because together we're better than apart. Music, she answered simply. He needs an engineer he can trust completely, music, and I need a commander who understands what I'm capable of. Family complicates things, but it also strengthens them. We protect each other by being excellent at our jobs. She showed me the reactor cores, enormous fusion engines, music, that powered the ship. This is where the real magic happens. All other systems depend on these reactors. If they fail, we're dead in the void. They seem more powerful than the coalition's equivalents. They are. And more dangerous, too. We push the engines harder than any other species would consider safe. A coalition engineer would have a heart attack if they saw our operating parameters. Why take the risk? Because in combat, that extra 10% speed, that additional power boost, can be the difference between life and death. We accept the danger because the alternative is worse. I noticed a small photograph pinned near her workstation. It showed a younger Alex Chen next to an older woman who shared her features. Your mother? I asked. Yes. She died when I was 16. Cancer. One of the diseases we still haven't completely conquered, music, he said firmly, but with pain beneath the surface. She was an engineer, too. That's why I enlisted. I'm, music, sorry for your loss. Thank you. She taught me that life is precious because it's fragile and that the best way to honor the dead is to protect the living. That's why, music, I'm here, Commander. That's why we're all here. The next morning, music, I met with Admiral Chen in his quarters. The space was austere, functional. There were no personal effects beyond a single photograph of a woman and two girls. Music, your family? I asked, pointing to the picture. Chen nodded. My wife, Sarah. My daughters, music, Emily and Grace are safe on Earth. Well, Emily is here, as you know, but Grace is, music, at home studying to be a teacher. You must miss them. Every day he served 2 glasses of an amber liquid. Try this. It's called whiskey. It's a human tradition. Before the battle, I accepted the glass and cautiously inhaled its scent. Music, the aroma was strong, almost painful. It's a weapon. Chen genuinely laughed. Sometimes it feels like one. But it's not for calming nerves, for building camaraderie. I took a small sip. Music, the liquid burned as it went down, but left a pleasant warmth behind. Music, I've been studying your species, I said, trying to understand you. And I'm not sure I can. You're unlike any species I've ever known. You seem to embrace contradictions. You claim to value peace, and yet, music, you're extraordinarily good at war. You form very strong emotional bonds, and yet you're, music, willing to sacrifice those you love for abstract concepts like duty and honor. Chen calmly sipped his whiskey. We contain multitudes, Commander. It's a quote from one of our poets. We are capable of great love and great hate, incredible compassion and terrible cruelty. We are not simple creatures. Are you afraid? I asked suddenly. Of the coming battle, he admitted without hesitation, terrified. I'm afraid of making the wrong decision and people dying needlessly. I'm afraid of not being fast enough, smart enough, ruthless enough. I'm afraid of what I might become to win, and yet I don't show it because, music, my people need me to be strong, they need to believe I know what I'm doing, that I have a plan, that victory is possible. Fear is natural, Commander, it's what keeps us alive, but we can't let it control us. Music, and if the price of victory is too high, Chen's expression hardened, music, then we pay it all the same, because the price of defeat is extinction. I'd rather live with the guilt of what I had to do than die, knowing I could have done more. The operation began, music, days later. I watched from on the bridge of my battleship, as the human fleet emerged from hyperspace, where the coalition fleets moved with mathematical precision, the humans seemed to flow like liquid metal, each ship adjusting its position in response, music, to some unseen signal. Fleet commander reported to my communications officer. The humans request permission, music, to commence their assault. I checked my chronometer. They had been in the system for exactly 7 minutes. Tell them to wait for the bombardment phase to soften the target. Sir, Admiral Chen says, and I quote, we don't need to soften anything. We need target designation. Through the music visor, I saw the devastating outpost hanging in space like a metallic spider. Music, its defensive platforms were already charging, energy signatures firing as they prepared for a conventional siege war. Sir, my tactical officer's voice carried a note of bewilderment. Music, the human ships are accelerating straight toward the station. My jaws clicked incredulous. All of them. Yes, sir. They're not even, music, attempting evasive maneuvers. On the tactical display, music, the human fleet looked like a swarm of insects swooping into a flame. Their ships were smaller than the coalition's, but they moved with terrifying speed. Incoming, music, transmission from Admiral Chen. Play it. Chen's face appeared on the display. I noticed something unsettling. The dilated pupils, the rapid breathing, and most disturbing of all. He was still smiling. Fleet, music, you might want to tell your ships to maintain distance. This is going to get interesting. Admiral. Your current approach, music, violates every principle of space combat. You're flying straight into defensive fire. Music, I know. Chen's grin widened. Cool, isn't it? The transmission cut off. I turned to my tactical officer. Human approach vector analysis. Sir, at your current speed and trajectory, you will weapons range in 14, music, minutes. However, the Devastator defensive platforms will have clear firing solutions in 8. I watched. Unable, music, to tear my gaze away as the human fleet hurtled toward what should have been certain death. The Devastators opened fire exactly at 8 minutes, music, just as predicted. Beam lances and plasma torpedoes filled the gap between the station and the human ships, and the humans did not slow down. The ships began to take hits. I saw the shields of a human cruiser collapse and the hull rip open in multiple places. Instead of music withdrawing, the damaged ship accelerated, using the last remnant of momentum to ram a Devastator defensive platform head-on. The explosion was catastrophic. It took out not only the platform,